The day Patsy Cline's plane went down, it wasn't just Nashville that wept. It was an entire nation. But here's what most people don't know. Just hours before that fatal flight, she'd turned to fellow singer Dottie West and said, "Don't worry about me, honey. When it's my time to go, it's my time." Those haunting words would become just one chapter in country music's book of tragic farewells, stories that remind us how the brightest stars often burn out far too soon. For decades, country music has carried a shadow that few dare to discuss. While other genres celebrate their living legends, country music mourns an unusually high number of artists lost in their prime. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on these stories, not just to remember how they died, but to understand how they lived and why their music still moves us to tears decades later. In the heart of Kentucky's coal country, a 13-year-old boy stood before a microphone, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of mountain music. That boy was Keith Whitley, and even bluegrass legend Ralph Stanley couldn't believe what he was hearing. That boy, Stanley would later say, has seen more sorrow than 100 men. No one knew then how prophetic those words would become. Keith Whitley wasn't supposed to be a tragic figure. Growing up in Sandy Hook, Kentucky, he was a bluegrass prodigy who could sing the traditional songs of the mountains like a man 3 times his age. By 15, he was touring with Ralph Stanley's band, stepping into the shoes once filled by the legendary Carter Stanley. The future seemed as bright as the stage lights that illuminated his young face night after night. But beneath that prodigious talent lay a darkness that would follow him throughout his meteoric rise. Keith had started drinking at just 11 years old, a habit that would become both his companion and his demon. Even in those early years, while touring with Stanley, he and fellow band member Ricky Skaggs would sometimes show up to performances drunk. They were just kids playing at being outlaws. But for Keith, the game would become all too real. The transition from bluegrass to mainstream country seemed natural for Keith. His voice, rich with traditional influences but smooth enough for modern country radio, caught Nashville's attention immediately. By the mid-1980s, he was recording songs that would redefine what country music could be. Don't Close Your Eyes, When You Say Nothing at All, I'm No Stranger to the Rain. These weren't just hits. They were masterpieces of emotional storytelling. The success came rapidly. 5 consecutive #1 singles, a voice that other singers envied and tried to emulate, a marriage to country singer Lorrie Morgan that seemed like a fairy tale. But Keith Whitley was living 2 lives, one in the spotlight, where his star was rising faster than anyone could have predicted, and another in the shadows, where alcohol maintained its relentless grip. Those who knew him speak of his generous spirit, his self-deprecating humor, and his absolute dedication to the authenticity of country music. He wasn't interested in the glossy pop-influenced sound that was beginning to dominate Nashville. Keith wanted to make real country music, the kind that spoke to the heart of human experience. And he did. His voice could take a simple love song and turn it into a soul-stirring confession. What made Keith's gift truly special was his ability to inhabit a song completely. When he sang Don't Close Your Eyes, lovers across America felt like he was telling their story. His interpretation of When You Say Nothing at All transformed a simple love song into an anthem of deep devotion that would influence generations of singers. Each performance seemed to draw from some deep well of emotion that most artists could only dream of reaching. Friends recalled how Keith would often sit for hours, listening to old records by George Jones and Lefty Frizzell, studying their phrasing and emotional delivery. He was a student of country music's rich history, even as he was helping to write its future. This dedication to his craft made his struggle with alcoholism all the more heartbreaking. Here was an artist who understood the soul of country music, perhaps better than anyone of his generation, fighting a battle that would ultimately claim his life. The tragedy of Keith Whitley isn't just in how it ended, but in how close he came to overcoming his demons. He would go through periods of sobriety, sometimes lasting months. He had everything to live for: a skyrocketing career, a beautiful family, and a future that promised even greater success. But alcoholism doesn't negotiate with potential or promise. On May 9, 1989, Keith's battle ended. He was found in his home, having succumbed to alcohol poisoning. He was just 33 years old. In the cruelest of ironies, his latest single at the time was I'm No Stranger to the Rain, with its haunting lyrics about persevering through dark times. The song would win him a CMA award posthumously, a bittersweet recognition of his ultimate contribution to country music. The impact of Keith Whitley's death sent shockwaves through Nashville that are still felt today. His influence can be heard in the voices of artists like Garth Brooks, Alan Jackson, and countless others who emerged in the 1990s. He showed that country music could maintain its traditional roots while speaking to a modern audience. In just 4 short years of mainstream success, he recorded songs that would become timeless classics. The years following his death only served to cement his legacy. RCA Records released numerous posthumous albums, including Kentucky Bluebird and Keith Whitley, a tribute album, featuring artists like Alan Jackson, Ricky Skaggs, and Alison Krauss performing his songs. These releases proved what many already knew, that Keith Whitley's impact on country music would far outlive his brief time in the spotlight. But perhaps the most poignant legacy of Keith Whitley's life isn't just in the songs he left behind, but in the way his story parallels another country music legend who left us too soon. Like Patsy Cline before him, Keith was at the absolute peak of his career when fate intervened. Both artists were revolutionizing country music in their own ways, Patsy with her unprecedented crossover appeal, and Keith with his perfect blend of tradition and contemporary style. The connection between their stories goes deeper than just tragic endings. Both Keith and Patsy possessed voices that seemed to carry every human emotion in their tone. They could take someone else's words and make them feel like intimate confessions, and both of them seemed to have a premonition about their fates. Keith through songs like "I'm No Stranger to the Rain," and Patsy in those final words to Dottie West before boarding her last flight. Like many artists who leave us too soon, Keith's story is filled with what-ifs. What if he had found sobriety earlier? What if someone had reached him that final morning? His widow, Lori Morgan, would later recall finding songs he had written but never recorded, each one a testament to his deep understanding of human emotion. These unreleased treasures hint at the artistic heights he might have reached had fate dealt him a different hand. The cruel irony of Keith's passing wasn't lost on those who knew him best. Just days before his death, he had spoken to friends about plans for his next album. He was excited about the future, talking about songs he wanted to record and artists he hoped to collaborate with. There was no indication that the end was near, except perhaps in the haunting lyrics of his songs. Even now, decades after his passing, new generations of country artists cite Keith Whitley as a major influence. Chris Young, who wasn't even 10 years old when Keith died, has spoken about learning to sing by copying Whitley's vocals. Modern stars like Blake Shelton and Keith Urban have covered his songs in concert, introducing his music to fans who weren't alive to witness his meteoric rise and tragic fall. In Nashville's Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, Keith's legacy is preserved alongside the greatest names in the genre's history. His guitar, stage clothes, and personal items tell the story of a boy from Sandy Hook who became one of country music's most influential voices. But it's in the music itself, in those perfect, emotion-laden vocals, where his true legacy lives on. Decades after his passing, new generations of country artists still cite Keith Whitley as a major influence. Chris Young, who wasn't even 10 years old when Keith died, has spoken about learning to sing by copying Whitley's vocals. Modern stars like Blake Shelton and Keith Urban have covered his songs in concert, introducing his music to fans who weren't alive to witness his meteoric rise and tragic fall. But perhaps the most poignant legacy of Keith Whitley's life isn't just in the songs he left behind, but in the way his story parallels another country music legend who left us too soon. Like Patsy Cline before him, Keith was at the absolute peak of his career when fate intervened. Both artists were revolutionizing country music in their own ways, Patsy with her unprecedented crossover appeal, and Keith with his perfect blend of tradition and contemporary style. The connection between their stories goes deeper than just tragic endings. Both Keith and Patsy possessed voices that seemed to carry every human emotion in their tone. They could take someone else's words and make them feel like intimate confessions. And both of them seemed to have a premonition about their fates. Keith through songs like "I'm No Stranger to the Rain," and Patsy in those final words to Dottie West before boarding her last flight. Just like Keith Whitley, Patsy Cline came from humble beginnings. Virginia Patterson Hensley grew up in Winchester, Virginia during the Great Depression, cleaning houses with her mother to help make ends meet. By age 13, she was performing in the local drugstore, her powerful voice already turning heads. But nobody could have predicted that this small-town girl would become the most influential female vocalist in country music history. From the start, Patsy approached music differently. While other children her age were playing hopscotch, she was studying the vocal techniques of big band singers and blues artists. She'd spend hours listening to the radio, mimicking different styles until she developed her own unique sound. Her mother, Hilda, sacrificed everything to help Patsy chase her dreams, working multiple jobs to buy her daughter's first performance clothes. By 16, she was sneaking into local clubs to perform, often lying about her age. Local radio stations began to take notice. She appeared on Wince's Joltin' Jim McCoy show, becoming a regular fixture in the regional music scene. But Nashville seemed a world away, and the path to stardom was anything but certain for a female artist in the 1950s. Patsy's voice was unlike anything Nashville had ever encountered. Rich, emotional, and impossible to categorize. She could belt out a country twang with the best of them. But there was something more in her delivery, a sophistication that transcended genre boundaries. When she sang Walkin' After Midnight on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts in 1957, she didn't just win the competition, she launched a revolution in country music. Her journey to stardom wasn't smooth. She married Gerald Klein at 20, divorced at 24, and struggled to break through in a male-dominated industry. But Patsy refused to play by anyone else's rules. While other female country artists of the time wore gingham dresses and cowgirl outfits, she chose sophisticated cocktail dresses. When producers tried to pigeonhole her sound, she pushed back, insisting on recording the songs she believed in. In the studio, Patsy was a perfectionist. Owen Bradley, her producer at Decca Records, recalled how she would spend hours getting a single phrase just right. During the recording of Sweet Dreams, she reportedly sang the song 47 times to achieve the perfect emotional delivery. This dedication to craft would influence generations of artists who followed. The recording of Crazy, written by a young Willie Nelson, perfectly captures what made Patsy special. She recorded it while on crutches, still recovering from a near-fatal car accident that had thrown her through a windshield. The song required multiple takes because the pain made it difficult for her to hit the high notes. But you'd never know it from the final version. Her voice soars with a confidence and control that singers still try to emulate today. That car crash in 1961 should have ended her career, if not her life. The impact threw her into the windshield with such force that multiple witnesses assumed she was dead. She spent a month in the hospital, and the facial injuries required multiple surgeries. But Patsy was back performing within 6 months, covering her scars with carefully applied makeup and wigs. The accident seemed to fuel her determination. She worked harder, pushed further, and sang with even more emotion than before. Behind the scenes, Patsy was revolutionizing the business side of country music. She demanded, and received, unprecedented control over her career decisions. She negotiated her own contracts, insisted on approval rights for her material, and fought for better pay for all performers. When a promoter tried to pay her less than male artists, she famously refused to take the stage until the disparity was corrected. By 1963, Patsy Cline was everywhere. She's Got You topped both country and pop charts. She was headlining major venues, commanding top dollar for performances, and helping other female artists navigate the industry. Loretta Lynn credits Patsy with teaching her how to survive in the music business. Dottie West, Barbara Mandrell, and countless others would later speak about how Patsy had mentored them. Back home, she was raising 2 young children with her second husband, Charlie Dick. Friends remember her as a devoted mother who could cook a mean chicken and dumplings. But the road called constantly. The demands of touring, recording, and maintaining her crossover success meant long hours and endless travel. Still, Patsy never complained. She loved performing too much. In the studio, her final sessions showcased an artist at the peak of her powers. Faded Love and Sweet Dreams were recorded just weeks before her death, with Patsy nailing both songs in single takes. Studio musicians from these sessions would later recall being moved to tears by her performances. March 3, 1963, found Patsy in Kansas City, performing at a benefit concert for the family of a deceased disc jockey. She was offered a flight home but turned it down due to bad weather. The next day, despite continued warnings about poor visibility, she decided to try again. Fellow performer Dottie West begged her to ride back to Nashville in her car. That's when Patsy spoke those haunting words. "Don't worry about me, honey. When it's my time to go, it's my time." The small Piper Comanche aircraft carried Patsy and 3 others. Pilot Randy Hughes, her manager and the son-in-law of her manager, and fellow Grand Ole Opry performers, Cowboy Copas and Hawkshaw Hawkins. They made it as far as Camden, Tennessee. In the darkness and fog, the pilot became disoriented. The plane crashed into the side of a mountain, killing everyone aboard instantly. Patsy was just 30 years old. The impact of her death was immediate and profound. The country music industry lost not just a stellar vocalist, but a trailblazer who would kick down doors for future generations of female artists. Her records continued to sell, and her influence grew even larger after her death. The raw emotion in her voice, the sophisticated arrangements of her songs, and her fearless approach to genre crossing became a blueprint for countless artists who followed. In the days following the crash, thousands of fans gathered outside the Ryman Auditorium for her memorial service. June Carter spoke of Patsy's generosity, recalling how she'd given up her spot on a tour so June could earn extra money. Ernest Tubb, fighting back tears, performed "Walking the Floor Over You," one of Patsy's favorite songs. The entire country music community mourned not just the loss of her voice, but the loss of a fierce advocate for artists' rights. The breadth of Patsy's musical legacy becomes clear in the diversity of artists who cite her as an influence. K.D. Lang studied Patsy's vocal techniques obsessively before launching her own career. Reba McEntire has often spoken about trying to capture Patsy's emotional delivery. Even rock artists like Bruce Springsteen have praised her ability to convey complex emotions in a single phrase. In the studio, Patsy had been a pioneer in developing what became known as the Nashville sound. Her collaboration with producer Owen Bradley helped create a sophisticated style that appealed to both country and pop audiences. Songs like "I Fall to Pieces" featured lush string arrangements and backup vocals that were revolutionary for their time. This crossover success helped establish Nashville as a major recording center. Her business acumen was just as influential as her music. In an era when female artists were expected to simply show up and sing, Patsy insisted on reviewing her own contracts, choosing her own material, and controlling her image. She demanded equal pay for equal work long before it became a mainstream issue. When young female artists came to Nashville, Patsy took them under her wing, teaching them how to protect themselves in a tough industry. Today, you can still hear Patsy's influence in nearly every female country vocalist. That ability to convey raw emotion while maintaining perfect control, to tell a story not just with words, but with every nuance of phrasing. That's pure Patsy. Artists from Linda Ronstadt to Martina McBride have covered her songs, each trying to capture a piece of that magic. Just weeks before the crash, Patsy had written letters to several friends, talking about her plans for the future. She was excited about new songs, new tours, new possibilities. Like Keith Whitley years later, she was at the absolute peak of her career, breaking new ground and redefining what country music could be. And like Keith, she left behind a legacy of recordings that continue to move listeners decades after her passing. The night before that final flight, Patsy performed "I Fall to Pieces" one last time. Those who were there say she had never sounded better. Something in her voice that night seemed to reach beyond the everyday world, touching something eternal. Every note, every phrase, carried the weight of genuine emotion. It was more than just a performance. It was Patsy Cline showing us one last time why her voice would echo through the decades to come. As Patsy's records continued to top the charts even after her death, many in Nashville couldn't help but draw parallels to another legendary voice that had been silenced too soon: Hank Williams. Like Patsy, Hank had revolutionized country music in his brief time, and like her, his influence would only grow stronger in the years following his tragic passing. Like Patsy, Hank Williams changed country music forever. But while Patsy helped create the sophisticated Nashville sound, Hank stripped country music down to its raw emotional core. Before Elvis made hearts throb or Johnny Cash walked the line, Hank Williams was country music's first superstar and its first legendary tragedy. Born in 1923 in Mount Olive, Alabama, Hiram Hank Williams entered the world with a hidden curse. Spina bifida occulta left him with chronic back pain that would shape both his music and his fate. His childhood was a patchwork of poverty and hardship, but music offered an escape. By age 8, he was already learning guitar from a Blackstreet musician named Rufus T. Tot Payne, absorbing the blues influence that would later set his sound apart. Young Hank first tried making money from music at 11, charging a nickel to perform on Montgomery Street corners. Even then, his voice carried a haunting quality that stopped people in their tracks. Local radio stations started featuring him while he was still in his teens. He formed his first band, the Drifting Cowboys, before he could even drive to shows. The road to stardom wasn't straight or smooth. World War II scattered his band members, and Hank's back condition kept him out of military service. He struggled with alcoholism early, getting fired from some of his first radio jobs for showing up drunk. But when he sang, none of that seemed to matter. His voice had a way of cutting through all pretense, reaching straight into listeners' hearts. In 1946, things finally started breaking his way. He landed a songwriting contract with the Cuff Rose Publications and caught the attention of Fred Rose, who would become his producer and mentor. His first recordings for Sterling Records showed promise, but it was his move to MGM Records in 1947 that sparked the legend. Move It On Over became his first hit, and suddenly, Hank Williams was a name people knew. Then came Lovesick Blues in 1949. Though Hank didn't write it, he made it entirely his own. That yodeling chorus and lonesome wail captured something essential about heartache and loneliness. The song shot to #1 and stayed there for 16 weeks. 6 encores at his Grand Ole Opry debut turned him from a rising star into a supernova. For the next 4 years, Hank Williams was unstoppable. Cold, Cold Heart, Hey Good Lookin', I'm So Lonesome I'd Cry, Your Cheatin' Heart. The hits kept coming. Each song seemed to dig deeper into the human heart, expressing emotions people felt but couldn't put into words. Even when he was singing someone else's lyrics, Hank had a way of making every word feel like a personal confession. But success couldn't ease his physical pain or quiet his inner demons. His marriage to Audrey Shepard, who had helped manage his early career, was crumbling under the weight of his drinking and her own ambitions. The back pain grew worse with each passing year. Doctors prescribed him morphine and other painkillers, adding fuel to his already dangerous relationship with alcohol. By 1952, things were unraveling fast. The Grand Ole Opry fired him for repeated drunken performances and no-shows. His weight dropped dramatically. He was getting shots of morphine from multiple doctors, washing them down with whatever alcohol he could find. But even in this downward spiral, he kept writing and recording songs that would become classics. His last recording session in September 1952 produced Your Cheatin' Heart, a song inspired by his divorce from Audrey. Despite his deteriorating condition, his voice still carried that unmistakable power to convey heartbreak and loneliness. Nobody knew these would be among his final recordings. New Year's Eve, 1952. Hank was supposed to perform in Charleston, West Virginia, but ice storms had grounded all flights. He hired a college student, Charles Carr, to drive him to a show in Canton, Ohio. Somewhere between Bristol and Oak Hill, in the back seat of his baby blue Cadillac, Hank Williams took his last breath. He was 29 years old. The official cause was heart failure, but everyone knew it was really a broken heart. Broken by pain, both physical and emotional, that his music could no longer heal. His last single released during his lifetime had been, I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive. Like Patsy's final words about her time coming, it seemed Hank had known what was coming. The funeral was the largest Montgomery had ever seen. Thousands of fans lined the streets to say goodbye to the hillbilly Shakespeare. Ernest Tubb sang Beyond the Sunset, and Roy Acuff performed I Saw the Light. The flowers piled so high they had to be loaded into 6 separate vehicles. Many of his greatest songs were released posthumously. Your Cheatin' Heart hit #1 shortly after his death, and the hits kept coming for years. His son, Hank Williams Jr., would later carry on his legacy, but there would never be another voice quite like Hank's. Today, more than 70 years after his death, Hank Williams' influence remains immeasurable. Every songwriter who's ever tried to capture the essence of heartbreak or loneliness owes something to Hank. Bob Dylan called him the greatest songwriter America ever produced. Leonard Cohen, Johnny Cash, and countless others have cited him as a primary influence. Like Keith Whitley and Patsy Cline, Hank Williams died at the height of his powers, with so much left to give. But in his brief time, he changed country music forever, stripping away artifice and pretense to reveal the raw, beating heart of human emotion. His voice, preserved on recordings that still move listeners to tears, reminds us why they called him the hillbilly Shakespeare. Those who knew Hank in his final days paint a picture of a man racing against time. Despite his deteriorating health, he kept writing songs at a furious pace. Friends would find him in hotel rooms, scribbling lyrics on whatever paper he could find. Even as his body was failing him, his creative spirit burned brighter than ever. The story of his last recording session has become country music legend. In September 1952, just months before his death, Hank arrived at Herzog's studio in Cincinnati. He was visibly ill, shaking from withdrawal, but insisted on recording. What followed was nothing short of miraculous. Take after take, that unmistakable voice rang true, delivering performances that would become his final gift to country music. His relationship with the Grand Ole Opry was particularly complex. The Opry had made him a star, and he loved performing on its historic stage. But his unreliability and drunken appearances strained that relationship to the breaking point. His firing from the Opry in 1952 broke his heart, but even that couldn't stop him from making music. The women in Hank's life played crucial roles in his story. His mother, Lily, had sacrificed everything to support his early career. His first wife, Audrey, helped shape his professional image and pushed him toward success, though their turbulent relationship would inspire some of his most heartbreaking songs. His second wife, Billie Jean Jones, whom he married just months before his death, provided a brief glimpse of happiness in his final days. His influence extended far beyond country music. When rock and roll exploded in the 1950s, many early rockers cited Hank as an influence. Elvis Presley often praised Williams's emotional honesty. Jerry Lee Lewis covered his songs. Even the Beatles admitted to studying his songwriting techniques. The details of his final ride have been debated for decades. We know he left Montgomery on December 30, 1952, headed for shows in Charleston, West Virginia, and Canton, Ohio. He was wearing his famous white cowboy suit and carrying a guitar and a notebook full of unrecorded songs. The weather was terrible, a mixture of rain, snow, and ice that made travel treacherous. At some point during that journey, probably in the early hours of New Year's Day 1953, Hank Williams slipped away. His driver, Charles Carr, didn't realize anything was wrong until he stopped for gas in Oak Hill, West Virginia. The king of country music died in the backseat of his Cadillac, a lonely end for a man who had touched millions with his music. The songs found in his notebook after his death hint at what might have been. Half-finished lyrics and rough song ideas suggest he was pushing his writing in new directions. One fragment, later completed by his son, became "There's a Tear in My Beer," showing that even at the end, his creative powers remain strong. His legacy lives on not just in his own recordings, but in the way he changed country music forever. Before Hank, country songs often dealt with simple themes in rural life. He showed that country music could tackle the deepest human emotions: love, loss, loneliness, and redemption. He proved that authenticity and raw emotion could connect with audiences more powerfully than polished perfection. After Hank's death, artists as diverse as Tony Bennett and Louis Armstrong recorded his songs. Ray Charles's version of "Your Cheatin' Heart" showed how Williams's music could cross both racial and genre boundaries. Even today, artists from all genres continue to discover and cover his songs, finding new meaning in his timeless lyrics. Just like Patsy Cline would do years later, Hank Williams helped establish Nashville as the undisputed capital of country music. But while Patsy would help create the sophisticated Nashville sound, Hank showed that the most powerful music often comes from the simplest place, the human heart. The story of Hank Williams, like those of Keith Whitley and Patsy Cline, reminds us how much these legendary artists accomplished in such brief spans of time. His influence would help shape another artist whose tragic story would unfold in a similar way, Jim Reeves, whose smooth vocals and crossover appeal would seem worlds apart from Hank's raw emotion, but who shared Hank's commitment to authentic country music. While Hank Williams gave country music its soul, Jim Reeves gave it sophistication. Known as Gentleman Jim, Reeves transformed the genre with his velvety baritone and polished style. But like Hank, Patsy, and Keith, his story would end in the skies over Tennessee, cutting short a career that was redefining country music's possibilities. Born in 1923 in Galloway, Texas, James Travis Reeves grew up dreaming of baseball, not music. His powerful arm and natural athleticism earned him a spot with the St. Louis Cardinals organization. But fate had other plans. A severe ankle injury in 1947 ended his baseball career, forcing him to return to his second love, music. That seeming misfortune would change country music forever. Reeves had been working as a radio announcer between baseball seasons, his smooth baritone perfect for the airwaves. When a scheduled performer failed to show up one day, Jim stepped in to fill the time. The response was immediate. That voice, warm, intimate, and controlled, captured listeners in a way few had before. Unlike the rough-edged sound that dominated country music in the early 1950s, Reeves developed a sophisticated style that would help create what became known as the Nashville sound. His breakthrough came in 1953 with Mexican Joe, but it was his 1957 recording of Four Walls that showcased what made him special. The song's subtle delivery and polished production pointed toward country music's future. Jim Reeves didn't just change how country music sounded, he changed how it was received around the world. His songs topped charts in Norway, India, and South Africa. In Ireland, he was so popular that locals referred to him as the most famous Irishman who never lived in Ireland. His version of "He'll Have to Go" became a global phenomenon, proving that country music could transcend cultural and national boundaries. In the studio, Reeves was a perfectionist who understood the power of restraint. While other singers might attack a song with force, Jim knew how to draw listeners in by holding back. Recording engineers spoke of how he would position himself differently at the microphone for different types of songs, using his voice like a fine instrument. This attention to detail set new standards for country music production. His influence spread far beyond Nashville. Frank Sinatra admired his phrasing. Elvis Presley studied his microphone technique. When the Beatles first toured Hamburg, German fans requested Jim Reeves' songs. He was building bridges between country music and the broader world of popular entertainment, earning country music a level of respect it had never before enjoyed. By 1964, Jim Reeves was at his peak. He had just finished recording what many considered his finest album, featuring songs like "Is It Really Over?" and "I Guess I'm Crazy." His business ventures were thriving. He owned a successful music publishing company and had invested wisely in real estate. He and his wife, Mary, had built their dream home, which they called Reeves Mansion. On July 31, 1964, Reeves was piloting his single-engine Beechcraft Debonair from Batesville, Arkansas, to Nashville. Despite being an experienced pilot, he encountered a violent thunderstorm near Nashville. The conditions were treacherous: heavy rain, strong winds, and close to zero visibility. His last radio contact indicated he was attempting to navigate through the storm. The plane never made it. Like Patsy Cline before him, Reeves disappeared into bad weather over Tennessee. The crash site wasn't discovered for 2 days, hidden in the dense woods near Brentwood. Jim Reeves and his manager Dean Manuel were both killed instantly. He was 40 years old. The funeral drew thousands of fans and fellow performers to Nashville's Ryman Auditorium. Miss Tubbs sang, "Is it really over?" A question that seemed to echo the thoughts of everyone present. How could another of country music's brightest stars be gone too soon? But Jim Reeves' story didn't end with his death. His widow Mary worked tirelessly to keep his music alive. She discovered dozens of unreleased recordings in his personal vault, carefully preparing them for release. These posthumous singles and albums continued to top the charts well into the 1970s, spreading his influence even after his passing. The extent of Jim's global impact became clear in the years following his death. In South Africa, his albums outsold Elvis Presley. In India, his songs were adapted into local languages and became standards. Norwegian singers still regularly record tribute albums to Gentleman Jim. His sophisticated approach to country music helped the genre find new audiences around the world. Those who worked with him in the studio often spoke of his dedication to getting things exactly right. He would spend hours working on a single phrase, understanding that the smallest details could make the difference between a good performance and a great one. This perfectionism sometimes frustrated his fellow musicians, but the results spoke for themselves. The crash site near Brentwood eventually became a place of pilgrimage for country music fans. Like the final resting places of Hank Williams and Patsy Cline, it stands as a reminder of how fragile life can be, even for those who seem to have it all. But unlike many tragic figures in country music, Jim Reeves left behind a legacy not of heartbreak and loss, but of sophistication and musical excellence. Today, whenever a country artist achieves international success or brings a new level of polish to the genre, they're walking a path that Jim Reeves helped forge. His influence can be heard in the smooth delivery of modern country stars and in the continuing efforts to broaden country music's appeal beyond its traditional boundaries. The story of Jim Reeves, like those of Keith Whitley, Patsy Cline, and Hank Williams, reminds us how one voice can change an entire genre of music. But his tragic end, like Mindy McCready's years later, would add another sad chapter to country music's history of lives cut short, of voices silenced before their time. Unlike many country artists of his era, Jim Reeves was a shrewd businessman who understood the international potential of country music. He toured extensively overseas, learning enough of various languages to introduce his songs in the native tongue of whatever country he was visiting. In South Africa, he recorded specific songs for that market, including "Jai is my liefling, you are my love" in Afrikaans, which became a massive hit. His personal life was as polished as his public image. While many of his contemporaries battled public scandals and addiction, Jim maintained a sterling reputation. He and his wife, Mary, were partners in every sense, working together to build his empire. She handled many of the business details, allowing Jim to focus on his artistry. Their marriage became a model for Nashville couples. The details of his final flight reveal both his dedication and the risks he took for his career. He had just finished a business meeting in Batesville, Arkansas, and was eager to get home to begin work on new recordings. Friends urged him to wait out the storm, but Jim was confident in his piloting abilities. He'd flown through bad weather before and had recently upgraded his instrument rating. In the wreckage, investigators found his briefcase containing new song lyrics and business documents. Even in his final hours, he was working to expand his musical legacy. One partially completed song, later finished by his wife and released posthumously, spoke of longing for home, a poignant detail given the circumstances of his death. The impact of his loss rippled through Nashville's business community as well as its creative circles. Jim had been one of the first country artists to take complete control of his business affairs, owning his own publishing company and making shrewd investments in real estate. He showed other artists the importance of treating their music as a business, not just an art form. His recording techniques influenced countless artists. He pioneered the use of the Nashville sound reverb, positioning himself precisely the right distance from the microphone to achieve the warm, intimate tone he was famous for. Studio engineers would later refer to this as the Reeves position. His attention to microphone technique changed how Nashville recorded vocals. Mary Reeves became a force in the industry after Jim's death, running their business empire and carefully releasing his unreleased material. She timed these releases perfectly, keeping his voice on the radio for years. Between 1964 and 1969, Jim Reeves had an incredible run of posthumous hits, including several number ones. His voice remained a constant presence on country radio throughout the 1970s. The investigation into his crash revealed the dangers that touring artists faced in an era when private aviation was becoming common, but weather forecasting was still primitive. Like Patsy Cline's crash, it led to changes in how the industry approached artist travel. Many labels began insisting that their artists use professional pilots for all flights. Jim's influence extended into unexpected areas of popular culture. In India, his songs were adapted into Hindi and became standards in Bollywood films. Norwegian teenagers in the 1960s learned English by singing along to his records. African musicians incorporated his smooth vocal style into their own traditional music, creating new fusion genres. His legacy lives on in surprising ways. Modern country stars still study his vocal techniques. The international markets he helped open remain vital to country music's global appeal. His insistence on professional business practices helped transform Nashville from a small-town music scene into the billion-dollar industry it is today. Perhaps most importantly, Jim Reeves showed that country music could be sophisticated without losing its soul. He proved that an artist could appeal to upscale urban audiences without sacrificing authenticity. This balance between tradition and innovation would influence generations of artists who followed. Each year, fans still gather at his gravesite in his hometown of Carthage, Texas, leaving behind poems and personal notes about how his music touched their lives. They come from all over the world, a testament to how one voice from a small Texas town reached across borders and cultures to touch millions of hearts. As country music moved into the modern era, Jim Reeves's influence would help shape another tragic figure in the genre's history. Mindy McCready, like Reeves, would strive for crossover appeal and professional polish, though her story would take a darker turn. While Jim Reeves helped country music reach new heights of sophistication, Mindy McCready represented a new era in country music, one where crossover appeal and pop sensibilities had become the norm. But her story would take a darker turn, revealing the harsh realities of fame in the modern music industry. When Mindy McCready arrived in Nashville at age 18, she seemed to have everything going for her. With striking good looks, a powerful voice, and unwavering determination, she embodied the dreams of every small-town girl who ever hoped to make it big in country music. Within 2 years of arriving in Music City, she had accomplished what few artists ever achieve: a double platinum album and a #1 hit. Her debut single, 10,000 Angels, resonated with audiences immediately. Released in 1996 when Mindy was just 20 years old, the song showcased her unique ability to blend country authenticity with pop appeal. The album of the same name would go on to sell 2 million copies, making her one of country music's brightest new stars. Success came almost too quickly. Unlike previous generations of country artists, who had years to develop their craft in small clubs and on local radio, Mindy was thrust into the spotlight with virtually no preparation. She found herself performing on major stages, doing national television appearances, and dealing with the intense scrutiny of modern media. Follow-up singles demonstrated her range as an artist. Guys Do It All the Time topped the country charts, its playful feminism and catchy melody establishing Mindy as more than just another pretty face in country music. She seemed poised to join the ranks of strong female artists like Reba McEntire and Shania Twain, who were dominating country music in the 1990s. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure was mounting. The music industry of the late 1990s was far different from the one Jim Reeves had navigated. Social media didn't exist yet, but tabloid culture was at its peak. Every aspect of Mindy's personal life became fodder for entertainment news. Her relationship with actor Dean Cain made headlines, pushing her further into the celebrity spotlight. Her second album, If I Don't Stay the Night, showed artistic growth, but couldn't match the commercial success of her debut. The music industry's expectations for immediate success left little room for artistic development. While legends like Patsy Cline had been able to grow and evolve as artists, the modern industry demanded instant and sustained success. As the new millennium approached, Mindy's personal struggles began to overshadow her music. Legal troubles, substance abuse issues, and troubled relationships became regular headlines. The same media machine that had helped build her career now seemed determined to document every misstep, every setback, every struggle. Despite these challenges, Mindy continued to make music. Her 2002 album, Mindy McCready, showcased a more mature artist, with songs that reflected her real-life experiences. But the industry had already begun to move on, seeking the next young star to promote. The same machine that had lifted her to fame at 20 had little use for her at 26. What followed was a period of public struggles that played out in the media. Unlike earlier generations of country artists who could deal with their personal demons in private, Mindy's battles were fought in the public eye. She appeared on Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew, attempting to address her issues while cameras rolled. The vulnerability that had once made her music so compelling now made her a target for public scrutiny. Through it all, those who knew her spoke of her generous spirit and genuine talent. Fellow artists remembered how she would always make time for fans, signing autographs until everyone had been attended to. Studio musicians recalled her perfectionism in recording sessions, her determination to get every note exactly right. Her story took an even darker turn in 2013. Following the death of her boyfriend, David Wilson, Mindy found herself struggling with depression and grief. Despite multiple attempts at recovery and the support of family and friends, she couldn't escape the darkness that had enveloped her life. On February 17, 2013, Mindy McCready died by suicide at her home in Arkansas. She was 37 years old. The tragedy of Mindy McCready's story lies not just in its ending, but in the way it illuminates the changing nature of fame in country music. The industry that had once nurtured talents like Patsy Cline and Jim Reeves had become a high-speed star-making machine, one that could build careers overnight but offered little support when artists struggled. Her musical legacy, often overshadowed by her personal struggles, deserves recognition. Songs like 10,000 Angels and Guys Do It All the Time remain powerful examples of 1990s country pop at its best. Her vocal style, blending traditional country with modern pop sensibilities, helped pave the way for future crossover artists. The outpouring of grief and support following her death revealed how many lives she had touched. Fellow artists spoke about her kindness, her talent, and her unfulfilled potential. Fans shared stories of how her music had helped them through their own difficult times. Even those who had chronicled her struggles in the media were forced to confront the human cost of relentless public scrutiny. Looking back at her career, it's impossible not to wonder what might have been. Like Keith Whitley, Patsy Cline, Hank Williams, and Jim Reeves before her, Mindy McCready left us with the sense that her story wasn't finished, that there were still songs unsung, still performances ungiven. Today, when young artists arrive in Nashville with dreams of stardom, Mindy's story serves as both a testament to the power of raw talent and a reminder of fame's heavy burden. Her music, particularly those early recordings that captured her voice in all its youthful power and promise, continues to move listeners who discover it. The story of country music's tragic losses, from Hank Williams to Mindy McCready, spans generations and eras. Each artist brought something unique to the genre. Each left us too soon, and each reminds us of music's power to touch hearts and change lives, even long after the voices themselves have been silenced. In the years since her passing, music industry professionals have begun to examine how the business itself contributes to artists' struggles. The pressure to maintain a perfect image while living life under constant scrutiny creates a unique kind of stress that previous generations of country stars never had to face. While Hank Williams and Patsy Cline certainly dealt with public attention, they never experienced the 24/7 media coverage that would become part of Mindy's daily life. Those who worked with her in the studio during her early days remember a dedicated artist who took her craft seriously. Producer Nora Wilson, who worked on her debut album, often spoke about her natural instincts as a vocalist. She knew exactly how to phrase a line to get the maximum emotional impact, he said. That's something you can't teach. You either have it or you don't. And Mindy had it in spades. Her influence can be heard in the works of artists who followed her. The blend of traditional country themes with contemporary pop production that she helped pioneer became a blueprint for many successful female artists of the 2000s. Songs like Guys Do It All the Time helped pave the way for the empowered female perspective that would become more common in country music. The final years of her life were marked by attempts at comeback and redemption. She recorded new material, much of which remains unreleased. Those who heard these later recordings speak of a deeper, more mature artist who had found new ways to channel her life experiences into her music. These songs, if ever released, might help reshape public understanding of her artistic legacy. In Nashville today, young artists still study her early performances, learning from her ability to connect with an audience and her skill at blending country and pop styles. While her personal struggles often overshadowed her musical achievements, industry professionals recognize her role in helping modernize country music's sound and image. Mindy McCready's story, tragic as it is, represents a turning point in country music history, a moment when the genre's traditional values collided with modern celebrity culture. Like the legends who preceded her, she left an indelible mark on country music, though perhaps not in the way she originally dreamed. Her legacy lives on not just in her music, but in the ongoing conversations about artist welfare and the price of fame in modern country music.